Paul said it, never let a good crisis go to waste. When the Death Star is looming in the distance and might be taking aim at us or a neighboring system, we know we can use these moments to gain traction for our own security programs. To get approval for that new headcount, fancy tool, or buy-in for our uplift recommendations. But what do we do when there's no crisis? What if I told you there were other levers we could pull, human hacks we can use to nudge people in the right direction and convince our organizations and leadership to make better security decisions? I'm here to teach you in the ways of the Force, of influence. So very quickly, who am I other than the Yoda to your Luke? I'm Antoinette Murray, and I have a master's in psychology, where I studied the dynamics of social groups, and in particular, romantic relationships. I'm curious about how people's brains tick, what motivates them, and how interpersonal relationships influence us. These interests have come in very handy in my career, where I love explaining cyber risk to business leaders and helping everyday people improve their basic security hygiene. But it doesn't matter what job you have. We've all had to deal with resistant people that need some convincing. And I have a small print disclaimer. This presentation is clearly inspired by Star Wars, and all copyrighted content remains the property of their respected owners. So what is influence? It's the ability to affect the behaviors of others. It's not just about wielding power. It's about building connections, understanding human behavior, and guiding others towards a desired outcome. To be influential, we need to be knowledgeable and trusted in our field. Well, trusted, knowledgeable and credible in our field, trusted, and build strong relationships. Your Jedi training is going to focus on the latter two. We'll be learning about inherent parts of our psyche and how to use them consciously to encourage relationship building and trust development. For those that are neurodiverse, some of the strategies I'll cover might not align with how your brain naturally works, and that's completely valid. I hope that understanding the reason behind a tactic helps you use it in your own way. Take this toolbox, see what works for you, and adapt them to your strengths. Remember, cyber risk is just business risk in a black hoodie. To get people to invest in security or act on our recommendations, we need to be able to human well enough to convince them they want to do it in the first place. We do need to start by addressing the dark side, though. Darth Vader rules with fear, authority, and power, often demanding urgency of action with strict consequences if you fail, especially when he's super busy and asks you to buy him some iTunes vouchers. But you will convince more Ewoks to join you in battle with honeycakes than you will with blasters. People do a lot for the people they like, so how can we get them to like us? A quick detour here to set the scene. We need to stop by Tatooine to pick up some essential information to understand how our brains work and what is driving these biases that we want to use. Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman introduced the concept of fast and slow thinking as a behavioral economics model in 2011. This model posits that we have two ways of processing information. System one is fast, automatic, and intuitive. It's your gut. And system two is slow, deliberate, and cognitively taxing. It's when you weigh up all the information before you make your choice. In everyday life, we have to make hundreds of decisions a day, like what to eat for breakfast, how to pay for our coffee, or how to answer that demanding email at work. But our brains can only process so much information at once. So we've developed mental shortcuts, or heuristics, to help us make decisions, solve problems, or form judgments quickly and efficiently, especially when time, information, and cognitive resources are limited. We rely on these heuristics for things we do often, like how to get to work or home, or what 2 + 2 equals. We don't have to think very hard about it, you just kind of know. In comparison, when you're making big or new decisions, like what house to buy, or 22 times 27, you tend to use system 2, and think a lot harder before you make your choice. But we don't have the energy for that kind of demanding analysis all the time, which is exactly why we've developed heuristics. But they can lead to biases and errors in judgment. Another important social psychology concept to know is cognitive dissonance. This is the discomfort we feel when our thoughts, feelings, and actions are not aligned. We are then motivated to reduce this dissonance by changing our beliefs or modifying our behavior. We might feel cognitive dissonance when we realize we've engaged in a behavior inconsistent with the person we think we are, we would like to be seen publicly as, or even if our current behavior doesn't align with our past behavior. For example, Lando believes he's a good friend, but he's coerced into betraying Han Solo and the others. He quickly feels cognitive dissonance between who he thinks he is, a good friend, and what his actions show, a betrayer. So he modifies his behavior and helps Leia and Chewie escape, and you can see the visible relief on his face when he aligns his mind and actions. Lastly, we have the need to belong. This is one of the most fundamental needs that humans have. As cave people, we wouldn't have survived if we weren't in groups, so we're evolutionarily predisposed to seek out our in-groups and find somewhere that we belong. Interpersonal relationships and positive social bonds are fundamental to our emotional health and well-being. So being shunned or isolated is basically a death sentence to the caveman part of our brain. So once we find our in-group, the us that is safe, we will do a lot to support them and maintain our membership. For example, think about how much effort you put into helping someone move house, just for some pizza and beer at the end. The similarity effect is an example of the need to belong as a heuristic. We're naturally drawn to people who seem like us. We feel an affinity with them, and because they seem similar in terms of look, dress, values, or interests, our brains assume they must be in a similar group to us, so they must also be trustworthy and competent. So finding common ground with people is a really important skill to have. It's how you demonstrate that you're part of their in-group. We will be harnessing the power of these three in our training: the need to find and support our in-group, the rebalancing of cognitive dissonance, and the quick inherent assessments people make without realizing it. Are you ready to start your training? We all know we need to make a first good impression. A good first impression. Words are hard. But why? Let's use this guy as an example. Now, we all know this friendly fellow, but let's pretend for a minute we didn't and he was an unknown walking past you in the street. You would probably make some assumptions about his interests, values, and personality based solely on his look and attire, wouldn't you? Now, what about this guy? Those are heuristics at play. Stereotypes are the unconscious assumptions we make about someone's personality based on certain characteristics and generalizations. They make processing information easier by allowing you to rely on previously stored knowledge rather than having to consider all the incoming information every time you walk past someone on the street. But they can be faulty or incorrect, and they're also resistant to new information, which is anchoring bias. This is the tendency to give disproportionate weight to the first trait or piece of information you receive. This then becomes the anchor off which you hang all subsequent information. But we can use this to our advantage. The halo effect is where people assume if you're good in one area, you must be good in others too. It prevents people from making a judgment based on all the objective evidence at hand. The halo, if you will, blinds them a little when looking at you. So a good first impression, or excelling in a particular area at work, can create a halo that spills over into other areas, generating goodwill and making people more inclined to ignore potentially negative information. For example, you probably assume your friends are good at their job, even if you don't know what they do. This is because you like them, so they have a halo over most of the things they do. If influence is affecting the behaviors of others, what drives behavior? It's a desire to satisfy basic needs and achieve goals. So if we want to influence people, we need to talk to them in terms of what they want and what they'll get out of it. To know what this is, we need to listen to them. Active listening is listening carefully and paraphrasing back what someone says to confirm your understanding. It's a way to ensure that you are intentionally listening to what they've said and not making assumptions about what they might mean. Active listening helps conversations by keeping your brain from jumping ahead to what reply you want to make, identifying what the sometimes underlying issue is, and it also addresses the other person's need to be heard, which can de-escalate emotions like frustration or anger. Repeating someone's message back to them shows you are listening, trying to understand, and is a great way to show that the message someone thinks they're sending is what is actually being received. Empathy is the ability to see things from another's perspective, to understand or feel their emotions. Or if you can't feel them, think of it as, can you understand the logic of where that person is coming from and acknowledge it? For example, that sounds really frustrating, or I can hear that you're disappointed about this. You don't have to agree with them, but showing that you understand where they're coming from and that you get them will make them feel heard, less defensive, and improve collaboration. Recognizing and connecting with people's emotions and actively listening to their perspective makes them feel validated, important, and generally more positive towards you. Framing is a little bit different. People respond differently to the same information depending on how it is presented or structured. For example, Grand Moff Tarkin could say to Leia, "Cooperate and your people will live," or "Resist and I will destroy your planet." They both mean the same thing, but trigger very different emotional responses. So choosing what aspects of your argument to emphasize will influence how the audience interprets your information and responds. Another form of framing is positive reframing. I personally find this incredibly useful when writing policies or security communications. Positive reframing is where you take negative language, can't and don't, and instead uses positive language, can and do. People respond better to empowerment than restriction, and changing the reference point reframes challenges into manageable tasks, fostering collaboration and problem solving. Right, this is where we can start really honing our control of the force and making conscious use of heuristics to build rapport and trust. Self-disclosure is the act of revealing personal information, thoughts, or experiences to others. Keyword, appropriately. It's one of the core ways humans build and maintain close connections and trust. Think about it. You don't go around telling everyone you meet on the street about your hopes, dreams, and fears. You save those for safe and trusted relationships. Also, people who reveal personal or vulnerable information appropriately are seen as more human and trustworthy. Think about how you feel when someone opens up and is vulnerable with you. You probably automatically start feeling warm fuzzies towards them. Now, I'm not saying go around sharing deeply personal things. It just needs to be something that isn't public knowledge. So you could open up about a project or skill you're struggling with, or an activity or hobby that you love doing. Self-disclosure might not feel natural to you, or it might even feel risky, but when used intentionally, it can be a powerful social tool. It taps into the need to belong, subconsciously telling someone you believe that they are part of your in-group, so they flag you as part of theirs, and cognitive dissonance. They'll feel a deeper connection must exist between the two of you. If you're opening up to me, we must be closer than I thought. The mere exposure effect is a heuristic where people develop a preference for something simply as a result of increased exposure. So increased familiarity, in this case, doesn't breed contempt, but instead breeds a sense of comfort, which our brains equate with safety. Think about our cave groups again. We had to get along to survive, so repeated contact leads to increased liking. Like that song you hated the first time you heard it, but now can't get out of your head. Mirroring is an unconscious thing we all do, but you can do it consciously. It's about subtly copying the body language, tone, or gestures of someone else. This builds rapport because, you guessed it, it makes them think we're more alike, so we must be part of the same group. By reflecting someone's actions back to them, we make them feel more comfortable with us, creating a sense of trust and connection. You can even do this to get resistant people to open up. By you displaying open and relaxed body language, you can cue someone to slowly reflect your posture, which will then change their cognitive perception, relaxing or calming them and opening them up to your ideas. This is because if your body and your actions are showing that you're relaxed, your mind has to align itself. For example, when Greedo confronts Han Solo in the cantina, Han sits back acting cool, calm, and relaxed, lulling Greedo into a false sense of security, and then bam, he shoots him. Han shoots him, I know. All right, now that we've learnt all of this, it's time to become a Jedi Master. These tools rely heavily on cognitive dissonance and commitment bias, which is the tendency humans have as individuals and groups to remain committed to their past behavior, particularly those they've exhibited publicly, even if they're no longer beneficial or rational. Reciprocity is the effect where people feel obliged to return favors. So offering something to someone up front, even if it's of negligible value, makes people feel like they should give something back to you. So offer to review that document, or even help them carry a box. It's like a free sample, and people will subconsciously feel obliged to return the favor, even if they don't realize it. For example, Obi-Wan Kenobi does this with Luke when he gives him his father's lightsaber. Luke has no way of knowing the legitimacy of this claim, but it strengthens the relationship between the two of them. The Benjamin Franklin effect is where people are more likely to favor you after doing you a small favor, especially if they previously disliked or felt neutral towards you. This is again rooted in cognitive dissonance, because doing someone a favor makes people justify their actions by changing their beliefs, by liking you more. This tool takes time, and the favor does need to be simple and easily achieved. It's apparently named after Benjamin Franklin, who noted it happening to him in his autobiography. He borrowed a book from a rival legislator and then returned it with a thank you note. At their next meeting, he found this man acted civilly and even positively towards him. Foot in the door is the bias where people are more likely to agree to larger requests after they've already agreed to smaller ones. So once a person commits to something small, they're psychologically primed to maintain consistency by agreeing to larger requests. Starting small reduces overwhelm. So, can you come review this change for me? Or can I have 10 minutes to pick your brains on something? Once they agree to this smaller ask, they're more likely to say yes to more significant commitments. Again, it needs to be done gradually. You can't go from 1 to 100 in 2 asks. For example, Obi-Wan asked Luke to come with him to Alderaan, instead of straight up asking him to train to be a Jedi. Luke then counters with taking Obi-Wan as far as Anchorhead, which then primes Luke to continue on the journey. Similar to commitment bias, the sunk cost fallacy is that once people have committed to something and put resources into it, they will continue in an endeavor even if it's no longer rational. They feel an internal pressure to maintain consistency with their previous decisions in their future behavior. So once they're invested in investing more. They see it as a waste if they stop now. For example, the Empire built a second Death Star without seeming to change the plans too much or even update their risk assessment, given the first one was so easily destroyed. So how can we use this in practice? To be honest, you probably already are, at least some of them subconsciously. But now you know why you do them, why they work, and how you can use them in future. So, let's say we want another team to do some work for us, but they don't really see security as important, and they just want to get on with their deliverables, which never happens, right? If we just walked up to them and just told them what we wanted them to do, how do you think they'd respond? Probably not all that well. So what can we, as security Jedi, do instead? We could start by reaching out and asking if we could come to their team meeting to find out more about what they do and how we can work closer together. This is anchoring and framing your engagement as a collaboration, not an increase in workload. Take some snacks along to the meeting, which will trigger reciprocity and might possibly give you a bit of a halo. In that meeting, gently mirror their behavior, and afterwards, find opportunities to talk to them around the office, which is the mere exposure effect. When chatting, remember to acknowledge their perspective, empathy, and active listen to find out what drives them. Or if you feel ready, you could open up and disclose something to them, or ask them to do you a small favor. Can you show me how to do this thing, which is the Benjamin Franklin effect, or I'd like your expert opinion on this discussion I'm having with a customer, which is foot in the door and a bit of flattery. Then, we gradually increase our asks, establishing a yes momentum, and getting them invested in the new plan, the sunk cost fallacy. Now, we have their buy-in. Because we've established a relationship based on trust and expertise, we know what their goals are, and we're going to help them achieve those goals. Now, I know training is exhausting, and you've just had a bunch of terms thrown at you, but I hope you walk away today having found at least one new thing to try at work or at home to influence and positively impact those around you. Remember, all the technologies, tools, and recommendations in the world aren't enough if you can't convince people to listen. So while we know there will always be another cyber breach, another crisis around the corner, we don't need to wait for it in order to better harness the force of influence. To be security Jedi Masters, for good, not evil. The end.
I am a super genius.